Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This week on the quarterdeck in our book, With the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we continue our journey as the division continues to prepare and get ready to deploy all of its units down there to Kuwait in preparation for the mission into Iraq. We're going to talk about Mount and what the division was doing to actually prepare the service members, the Marines, to allow them to be able to fight door to door, house to house, because that is how the Iraqi Army was planning on getting all the units into the urban environment to allow them to have a higher advantage to the Marines of the 1st Marine Division. In our hero highlight this week, we take a look at the story of Major Robert Edwards Galler and his heroism, his tactics, what he did to allow him to earn the Congressional Medal of Honor during World War II.
Drop and give me 25. I'm the gunny.
It's time for the gunny.
The quarterdeck. Lights. Get online right now. You got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, my bunch of knuckle-dragging, beer-drinking, hard-charging devil dogs. You're listening to the quarterdeck. I am your host, Miguel, the Gunny Signs.
Get off the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
The quarterdeck. Here we go again. Another day, another dollar, another episode here on the quarterdeck. If you're new to our podcast, welcome. And welcome to joining us here on our journey as we focus a lot more talking about the Marines, the 1st Marine Division, and what they did during the time in 2003 when they actually deployed into Iraq. And that has been our main focus here for it's been about a couple of weeks now that we've been focusing on discussing all these things. But speaking of that, I mean, some of you guys can remember, when you first came into the service, you had to conduct the Marine Corps Institute, the Marine Corps College had MCIs that you had to complete in order for you to actually get promoted. And there were some that were actually required for you to have before you were even considered to be promoted. Some of you guys can remember some of these things, that personal financing, math for Marines, things like that you had to make sure that you had completed to ensure that you were going to be getting promoted, especially from private first class to the rank of Lance Corporal. You need to have those MCIs that needed to get done. So throughout the whole time that I was on active duty, there were so many different MCIs that needed to be completed because it was just part of the whole promotion system and the way that the Marines dealt with knowing certain things to ensure that they had them done, because these were things that needed to be completed. It was a check in the box that needed to be done in order for the individual Marine to be considered for promotion, because if there was a Marine that had them completed and one that did not, obviously they were going to have a higher proficiency in conduct marks, higher than the other one that didn't complete those types of things. But looking back at it now that we're focusing on reading about, the division in 2003 during the time in Iraq and stuff, and I started thinking about the Commandant's reading list and all the different books that were on there that, NCOs were required to read books from the Commandant's reading list to make sure that they were staying proficient in their reading skills and things like that. And now that I think about it, I'm like, man, what books did I actually read from the Commandant's reading list? And for the love of me, I cannot remember what books I actually read. The one book that I do remember that everybody always had to read was Message to Garcia. That is the one book that everybody had to actually read. If we think about it, we can actually, it was probably the shortest book, A Message to Garcia, that was there in the Commandant's reading list. And what this was basically almost like an essay. It was an essay talking about how an individual was sent to deliver a message that were being sent out there. Okay. And what it talks about, it is a individual that was selected to be able to deliver this message. Now, this book was a book written by Elbert Hubbard in 1899, and it helped to express the value of that particular individual taking the initiative and consensus in any type of work. It is a primary example of something that is dramatized or a version of a daring escapade that was performed by an American soldier. In this particular case, it was First Lieutenant Andrew S. Rowan. And this was right before the Spanish-American War. And what it does, it actually describes Rowan carrying a message from President William McKinley to General Calixto Garcia, who was a leader of the Cuban insurgents that was somewhere in the mountains of Cuba. No one really knew where. So it basically talks about his journey from actually delivering this message to him and everything else to be able to go out there and do that. Okay, so the point is that McKinley gave Rowan this letter, and it was to be delivered to Garcia. Rowan took the letter. He didn't ask any questions. He didn't ask where he was or anything like that. So that was his sole mission and everything else. Now, this book was originally published as a filler without a title in 1899 in the issue of the Philistine, a periodical which at the time was written entirely by Hubbard. And he, complains about lazy and incompetent workers. It struck a chord with him and many of the corporate executives during that time. Now, one of these was George H. Daniels, a promotion-minded executive with the New York Central Railroad. Daniels reprinted the essay hundreds and thousands of times as part of the railroad's 4-track series of pamphlets. So he reprinted this thing a lot to make sure that it's getting out there. And now, specifically, in Hubbard's version of Rowan's journey, what happened was that President McKinley needed to communicate with General Calixto Garcia, a leader of these Cuban insurgents. So someone said to the president, there was a fellow by the name of Rowan who will find Garcia for you. If he can, nobody can. He was then sent for this particular mission and was given a letter to be delivered to Garcia. Now, how the fellow by the name of Rowan took the letter, he sealed it up in an oilskin pouch, strapped it over his heart. In 4 days and weeks he came out on the other side of the island, having traversed hostility on foot, and he delivered this letter to Garcia. So no matter what, he accomplished the mission. He took the initiative and did everything that he needed to do in order for him to be able to do what he needed to do. And this was basically what he wanted to portray by this. Okay? So some of the facts and the only true statement that Hubbard wrote in his essay was that Rowan landed off the coast of Cuba on an open boat. All the rest, including McKinley, needed to communicate with Garcia was Rowan delivering a letter to the general was false. It was Major Arthur L. Wagner that headed the Military Information Division, who was the one that successfully petitioned General Harry Clark Corbin for permission to send spies into Cuba and Puerto Rico and gather information. And so, as you can see, there's many different versions of this story and so many different ways that it was told, that it was written, and all those things. So you can see that it was reprinted many, many, many times. And it's almost, I look at it almost like playing a game of telephone when you were a kid, when you were young. Looking at it, you tell somebody something in their ear, and the further and further it goes on and on, the story keeps being told over and over and over again. Things are going to change about it. More things are going to be added. Things are going to be taken away. And it's going to be a more dramatic version of the story. But this is what came to mind to me this week, because it is important that we understand, not only as human beings, not only as Marines, as American military personnel from all the different branches of service, we need to make sure that no matter what our task is, what our mission in life is going to be, that we do it to the best of our abilities, no matter what. Don't ask any questions, get it accomplished, go out there and do what's best for you, what's best for your family. Just like Garcia did, he hit it out there and did his thing. He completed his mission, no questions asked, and he just made sure that he delivered what he needed to deliver. And that is the way that we got to look at it myself included, I got to remind myself from time to time, like, hey, you have to set forth and head into the world and accomplish any mission that's going to be put in front of you, no matter what it is. The way that I look at it is that there are going to be certain things that occur in someone's life. There's going to be tasks. There's going to be missions. But more, the way that I look at it now is that these are a bunch of tests that are being put in front of you to see what your reaction is going to be, how you're going to handle all these different kinds of tests. How you do that is going to be up to you. But we have to keep looking forward to ensure that we are successful, and no matter what is put in front of us, that we are going to be successful. We're going to come on top, and we're going to get to the other side, and we're going to be that much stronger because we found a way to accomplish our mission. Are you looking for a photographer who can capture the most important moments in your life? Look no further than Miguel Saenz Photography. Miguel Saenz is an award-winning photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty and emotions of weddings, family portraits, and special events. With years of experience and a creative eye, Miguel Saenz will create stunning images that you'll treasure for years to come. Whether you're looking for a traditional wedding album, a unique family portrait, or a professional headshot for your business, Miguel Saenz Photography has the expertise to bring your vision to life. From the initial consultation to the final product, Miguel Saenz will work with you every step of the way to ensure that your images reflect your unique style and personality. Don't settle for mediocre photographs that simply document an event. Trust Miguel Saenz Photography to create timeless images that capture the essence of your special moments. Book your session today and experience the magic of Miguel Saenz Photography. Visit Miguel Saenz Photography online at miguelsaenzphotography.com to see examples of his work and schedule your appointment today.
What we're gonna do right here is go back. Way back into time.
Last week in our reading of our book, With the 1st Marine Division in Iraq of 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we covered how the division was continuing its preparation for the division to deploy from the United States and head over there to Kuwait in preparations of heading into Iraq, and how they were conducting their final training exercises in 29 Palms, California, to ensure that the division had a solid plan, an understanding on how the division was going to participate, working together not only with each other, but with other units and other branches of service that were going to be working together to ensure that the mission was going to be a success. This week, we're going to keep talking about the division rehearsals, but more specific, talking about the division's Mount Seminar and what that actually considered, what it covered, and what they were actually talking about. Let's go ahead and get into reading and discussing what the division was up to, what its next steps were going to be to ensure the successful mission. The Iraqis had made a considerable amount of noise in the press regarding their intent to conduct an urban-centric defense. While it was difficult to separate Iraqi rhetoric from reality, urban combat would certainly be one of the realities of the coming fight. The threatened Iraqi plan was to draw attacking forces into the cities, where they could lessen the technological and fire superiority advantage of the coalition. The possibilities of this course of action has strategic implications as well. Collateral damage, civilian casualties, and the loss of coalition lives would create negative feelings at home in the U.S. and abroad. The Iraqis had, no doubt, studied the results of the American fight in Somalia, as well as the Russian experience in Chechnya. These recent experiences stood as a reminder that the individual Marines, well trained and well equipped for the urban fight, would make a critical difference in the division's success of the Iraqi urban battlefield. Accordingly, the division hosted a military operations on urban terrain, MOUT, seminar in December of 2002 to consider the implications of the urban fight for the division and the supporting units. The 1MEF plan was to bypass urban areas. Developed by Lieutenant General Hagee and embraced by Lieutenant General Conway, would help to avoid some of the worst implications of the proposed Iraqi urban-centric defense. Still, fighting in the urban terrain of Baghdad and selected other cities would inevitably occur at some point in the war. Lieutenant Colonel Sean McGee, an enthusiastic reservist recently activated for this fight, worked diligently to set up the division's mount seminar on short notice. A fine example of a Marine reservist eager to get into the fight. McGee had volunteered for mobilization and put together a superb seminar. This was an important preparatory event for the division, and the CG flew back to California from Kuwait to attend. Much of the ambiguity about how the division would plan to fight in Baghdad was resolved over the 3 days of the seminar, with nearly all regimental, battalion, and supporting commanders present. The evidence included the input of subject matter experts from the various Marine Corps agencies, including the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, MCWL, Marine Aviation's Weapons and Tactics Squadrons, MOTS-1, and Mark Syscom. Attendees including staff members of the Division 3rd MAW, 1 MEF, RAND Corporation advisors also attended. These experts gave the commanders and planners of both the division and MEF insights into the specific tactics, techniques, and procedures that would allow them to win in an urban battlefield. The assembled Marines discussed the implications associated with MOUNT, built and established Marine Corps doctrine, and developed mitigation strategies suited specifically for the urban areas of the division's AO. Guest speakers, Generals Martin Steele and Norman Smith, discussed their combat experience in Hugh City to help focus the commanders and staff. The contributions of these veterans Marines and their combat insights were enormously helpful in preparing a new generation of Marines for this type of operation. Immediately following the seminar, the division's actions to acquire some of the necessary communications equipment for the fight picked up steam. The aging green gear communications equipment the division possessed was not suitable for modern urban combat, and the G6 coordinated with the Warfighting Lab to develop communications alternatives. A major initiative pursued was to provide a more robust communications capability between the armored and the infantry units. And one proposed solution was to procure British-made personnel role radios, PRRs. These personnel communication devices would be used throughout the division to augment and interfere without the divisional tactical radios. Working in conjunction with Mr. Steve Fisher and the Marines of the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, these radios were procured to augment the division's communication assets. They would prove very useful for infantry squad support, operations in built-up areas, security force operations, and convoy support. General Helston and Conway wholeheartedly supported and resourced the critical buy. The G6 received the distributed 3,443 radios throughout the division. These PRRs received the universal acclaim of the Marines who used them. The Mount Symposium dialogue could only be validated by practice and execution. Earlier training that occurred in urban complex located in the old Victorville Air Base in Southern California, 2 of the division's maneuver battalions had put the Marines through the rigors of urban combat at this facility. This training, dubbed the Urban Combined Arms Exercise, or the UCAX, was highly effective and much praised by the battalions who had the opportunity to attend. Major Mike Samroff, the operations officer from 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, in the vernacular of the day, described it. UCAX is money. Every scenario was trained to in Victorville. We ran into during combat operations. The theme was repeated by members of the division who had participated or observed the training. Participants described the skepticism they originally had when faced with some of the scenarios presented in the UCAX. Militias competing for power on the streets, breakdown of civilians' authority, unruly crowds at food distribution centers, car bombs, and snipers hiding in crowds were among many of the questionable scenarios that were found later to directly mirror situations the Marines were faced with on the ground in Baghdad. The division set out to provide this opportunity to all its additional battalions. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The deployment order came and units began to head to Kuwait. Although the training evolution was cut short, those who participated in the UCAX generally felt that this was the best training they could have received for this fight. So everything was starting to come into play. And as you can see, they were expecting, they were already anticipating that eventually the fight was going to go into the cities, into the streets, because that is the way that the Iraqi army was planning to fight against all of the American and coalition forces that were heading into this fight. Their understanding in their minds or their brain housing group was that they could win that kind of fight against these types of forces that were going to be heading into Baghdad. So with this type of training and that seminar that they had, the Mount seminar that they conducted was very, very productive. And this allowed the units that participated to allow themselves to be put into all kinds of different situations. They talked about car bombs, how they talked about snipers that were mixed in with crowds and stuff. And I can tell you, every time we conducted any kind of training dealing with that stuff, whether it was mobs of people that were wanting food or something like that that occurred inside of a town for the training that we were doing, they made it seem very, very realistic because they brought in hired actors that were the ones that were actually out there in the town as the population that we were having to deal with while we were doing all these types of training exercises, just to make sure that we would have a better understanding on how to deal with all these different types of situations that could and eventually would happen now that we were heading into Baghdad, into all the different cities that were out there once the division actually headed into Iraq. So interesting how all this stuff comes into play and how they actually put all this together and how the seminar happened. I had no idea that they even conducted any kind of seminar, or that a lot of the commanders that were already in country flew back to sit down at the seminar to discuss this whole mount evolution of what they were needing to do. They were also talking about how the training was actually cut short because the units were already starting to deploy. And so that was priority to get the units into country. As far as the units that were part of this training, man, and it could have been put any better than, how it was said that, man, that training was money. Because it prepared the individual Marine for all the situations that they could possibly face and allow them to actually focus and allow them to react to make that best decision to allow themselves and the Marines around them to be sure that they not only survived, but they were able to execute the mission that they were being set out to complete. Next week in our reading, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about how the division used Legos, or conducting Lego drills, to prepare them for their upcoming deployment into Iraq. Hero Highlight. This week in our Hero Highlights, we're taking a look at the story of Brigadier General Robert Edward Galler, United States Marine Corps, and his Medal of Honor citation. Robert Edward Galler, a combat aviator and Medal of Honor recipient for heroism in aerial combat during the Guadalcanal campaign of World War II, was born in Seattle, Washington, 24 October 1913. He attended the University of Washington and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Commercial Engineering in 1935, at which time he began elimination flight training at the Naval Reserve Aviation Base, Seattle. In June of 1936, he began his aviation cadet flight training at Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida, and was commissioned to second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in 1 July of 1936. Following the designation as a naval aviator in April of 1937, he was transferred to 1st Marine Brigade in Quantico, Virginia for duty with Aircraft 1. In July of the same year, he was assigned to a course of instruction at the Basic School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Following the completion of his studies in June of 1938, he was ordered to New York Navy Guard, but shortly thereafter was transferred to the Virgin Islands, where he served with Marine Scouting Squadron 3 in St. Thomas. He was advanced to First Lieutenant in July of 1939. First Lieutenant Galler was returned to the United States in June of 1940, and in July reported to the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing in San Diego, California. In January 1941, he was ordered to Hawaii and was appointed a captain in March of 1941. He was serving at the Marine Corps Air Station Iwaoahu when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941. In May of 1942, he assumed command of Marine Fighting Squadron 224. It was while in command of this unit that he received the nation's highest award. Shortly after his promotion to the rank of major, he also received the British Distinguished Flying Cross for the same act of heroism. Following the presentation of the Medal of Honor by President Franklin D. Roosevelt at the White House on 24 March 1943, Major Galler was ordered to Marine Forces Air West Coast, Miramar, California, where he served as Assistant Operations Officer. Shortly after advancement to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in November of 1943, he was ordered to return to the Hawaiian Islands. where he became Chief of Staff, Marine Air Hawaiian Area. In May 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Galler was named the Operations Officer, 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing. He served as an observer during the Peleliu Islands campaign while on temporary duty from the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing. His next assignment found him as a training officer of Provisional Air Support Command, Fleet Marine Force Pacific. He again returned to the United States in June of 1945 and reported to the Marine Barracks Naval Air Training Base, Corpus Christi, Texas. In July, as officer in charge of the Cadet Regiment, he remained in the capacity until August of 1947, at which time he was assigned as a student at the Armed Forces Staff College in Norfolk, Virginia. In June of 1948, he reported to Marine Aircraft Wing at the Marine Corps Air Station, Cherry Point, North Carolina, where he served as Operations and Training Officer. He joined Headquarters Squadron 2 at the station in April of 1949 and was transferred 26 April of 1950 to Naval Air Station San Diego, California. He served there as Marine Planning Officer and later as Assistant Chief of Staff for Plans on the staff of the Commander, Air Force, U.S. Pacific Fleet. During his assignment, he was promoted to Colonel in March of 1951. Colonel Galler sailed in March 1952 for Korea, where he saw duty as Assistant Chief of Staff, G4, Supply, of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing until the following May. He was then named Commanding Officer of Marine Aircraft Group 12. And for extraordinary achievement on 11 July 1952, he was awarded a Gold Star in lieu of 2nd Distinguished Flying Cross. According to the citation accompanying his medal, he led a maximum effort strike of Marine attack aircraft against a heavily defended industrial area in the North Korean capital city of Pyongyang. Colonel Galler was also awarded the Legion of Merit with Combat V for his service in Korea from 24 May to 5 August of 1952, when he was shot down behind enemy lines by anti-aircraft fire and later rescued by a helicopter. After a period of hospitalization, he returned to duty at El Toro, California in October 1952 as Assistant Chief of Staff G1 Personnel and later G3 Operations of Aircraft Fleet Marine Force Pacific. He was enrolled as a student in the Air War College, Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama in July of 1953. Upon graduation from the college, the following June, he was transferred to Headquarters Marine Corps, Washington, D.C., where he became Assistant Director, Guided Missiles Division, Bureau of Aeronautics, Department of the Navy. He served in that capacity until January of 1956, when he became Acting Director. The following June, he was awarded a master's degree in Engineering Administration from a George Washington University, Washington, D.C. For exceptionally meritorious service in combat. He was advanced to Brigadier General upon his retirement on 31 July 1957. Brigadier General Galler passed away on 27 June 2005 in Dallas, Texas. He was laid to rest in Texas State Cemetery, Austin, Texas. A complete list of Brigadier Galler's medals and decorations include the Medal of Honor, Legion of Merit with Combat V, Distinguished Flying Cross with 1 Gold Star, Air Medal with 4 Gold Stars, Purple Heart, Presidential Unit Citation with 1 Bronze Star, American Defense Service Medal with Base Clasp, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal and 1 Silver Star, American Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Korean Service Medal with 2 Bronze Stars, United Nations Service Medal, Distinguished Flying Cross, a British award, and the Korean Presidential Unit Citation. The Quarterdeck. So many things to cover in so little time. In our reading of our book, with the 1st Marine Division in 2003, No Greater Friend, No Worst Enemy, we started talking about mount operations. How the hell was the division going to react to actually going into a city, going house to house, and fighting the Iraqi Army? Because that was their plan. That was their plan, to get all these forces into the cities and actually cut off the communications, cut off the way that they were used to training to fight and all these different things that they knew how to do to allow them to be more successful. What a great plan. Little did they know that the armed forces, the U.S. and other coalition forces had different ideas on how they were going to actually defeat the Iraqi army in their own game. And that is what we talked about this week regarding the actual mount and how the division was preparing for that. Now, next week with that, we're going to go ahead and start talking about how the hell the division was going to use Legos. Yes, you heard me correctly. The division was going to use Legos to conduct drills to allow their Marines to be more prepared now that they were getting ready to actually head into country. In our hero highlight this week, we talked about Brigadier General Robert Edward Galler and the things that he did in order to make sure that he earned himself that Congressional Medal of Honor. And it seems just like something that I'm noticing as we keep going through here, through our World War II scenarios and everything that's going on here, we're starting to see that there's a lot of aviators, a lot of Air Wing Marines, because they're the ones that were conducting all of these missions during that time. And he was one of those that did such great things that earned him that Congressional Medal of Honor. Next week, we're going to take a look at the story of Private First Class Harold Gonzalez and see his story of how he earned himself that Congressional Medal of Honor. If you're anything like me, I'm looking at my watch right now and I'm realizing that, holy crap, we're already more than halfway through the month of April. Where the hell has the time gone, man? It's like April Fools is happening all the time because the time just keeps on flying by. And I don't even know where my days go because my days get so mixed up and so put together that I have no clue. I lose track of time and it's just hard to believe that, man, before we know it, shoot, we're already going to be in May. But one thing that gets me is that, oh my God, the weather here in Arizona, it's still cold. It was in the 70s today. And yes, I know that some of you guys, the 70s, you're already in shorts and tank tops. But hey, give us Arizonians a freaking break because we gets over here into the 70s or the 60s, bust out the beanies, the gloves, and oh my God, it's a blizzard time out here because it gets cold. I guess, I have become a wussy when it comes to cold weather because I've been living out here in the hot so long that in a little bit of cold weather and my bones start crackling, my back starts hurting, and it just starts aching everywhere. So here's to you, hoping that you had a great Easter weekend last weekend, that you spent it with your family. A big shout out to all the new listeners that are joining us here on our podcast. And once again, I want to thank everybody for sharing, for allowing other people to come into our podcast and enjoy and listen to the things that we are talking about every single week. Just as a reminder, remember that we have our Facebook page, The Quarterdeck with Gunny Signs, so go on there, leave your comments, your questions. And again, if you are interested in being a guest on our podcast, please feel free to leave your information on there and we'll reach out to you as soon as we can. And we will schedule a time and a date to be able to get together with you and actually conduct an episode so we can have you here on our podcast and our show. So until next week, this is Miguel, the Gunny Signs, sounding Liberty Call.
Get out the bus!
I do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend
The Constitution of the United States.
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.